Okay, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey into getting into this field and just generally what I do in the DNA section and then forensics as a whole. So to get started, so I became interested in forensics, like many of you, I assume, by starting to watch crime shows. Criminal Minds and Castle and NCIS were always some of my favorites. I'd always just found it interesting, never really considered it a career path, but just always had a general interest in science and kept this kind of in the back of my mind until I went to college and was like, well, maybe this could be something I could do in my future. So speaking of college, I went to school. Like they said, I am not from the Kansas City area. I'm actually from the Omaha area up in Nebraska, where I went to Fremont High School and graduated in 2015. When I did graduate, I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I just knew that I had a general love for science and math and wasn't sure what I wanted to do with it. Fast forward, I went to college in Des Moines, Iowa at Drake University, where I graduated in 2019, so just this past, or two past Mays, where I was a biochemistry, cell and molecular biology, and chemistry double major. That decision came from a lot of really supportive professors and teaching staff and friends and sorority sisters who listened to my interests in both science and criminal justice and helped gear me into this career field. So the stepping stones I took to get into this career field may look different from other people that I work with. Everybody kind of has their own unique path. So one of the big things that I did while I was still in undergrad was lab research with different professors. So the first one was in a large lab environment. We had about 20 to 30 undergrads, which was on tourniquets and applying the right amount of pressure to stop bleeding with tourniquets. And then once I made the decision that I really wanted to go more into a molecular field, more bench science, if you will, I did a small lab environment type research with the biochemistry, now the biochemistry professor at Drake, and we looked at plant hemoglobins. These were really good experiences, not only to build myself as a future professional, but also just in the interview and to get more comfortable working independently in the lab, because you definitely get hands-on lab experience. It is a time commitment outside of your regular classes because the lab waits for no one. So you definitely have to learn time management and prioritization, communication, all of those great things. Both of those were excellent experiences for me. And then when I was trying to determine my major, I and my parents, they were very determined to do job shadowing to make sure this is what I wanted to do. So I actually got the opportunity to shadow at the crime lab in Ankeny, Iowa, which is a suburb of Des Moines, and it actually serves all of Iowa. So I was able to shadow both a forensic scientist in DNA and biology and the ME, the medical examiner, there to determine what kind of career path I wanted. Both were very eye-opening experiences. And then the second job shadowing I did was a human DNA identification lab, which is actually housed in the medical center in Omaha. I guess Omaha is kind of fortunate. They don't have as much crime as we do in Kansas City. And so their DNA forensics is actually done out of the hospital lab because they don't have enough crime to fund a lab associated with just the police force there. So those are both very crucial in me deciding to go into this field. Just spending a day or an afternoon with those professionals answering questions, seeing what a lab looks like outside of a classroom environment was very helpful. The next thing I did, was probably the best thing for my experience coming into this work, was an internship in the summer of 2018 with the Omaha, Nebraska Police Department. I was the intern for the Child Victim and Sexual Assault Unit. It was definitely an eye-opening experience, to say the least. I got to shadow detectives, read police reports. I got to sit in on interviews with the victims and their families. We visited they do have a lab for latent prints and CSI. And so I did get to visit them, and that's where I got to meet my first bloodstain pattern analysis professional. The canine unit was really cool. I'm a big dog lover, so that was fun. And this is a photo of me at court for the first time ever. I was so excited, very much nerded out, but it was just a summer internship. It was unpaid, but definitely spent, just 20 hours a week learning as much as I could about this field and about the impact I can make. So really fun summer. So this job in Johnson County is actually my first big kid, as I like to call it, or my first full-time job out of college. So I graduated in May 2019, and then I started this job in September 2019. So I'll have been here, 11 months in a few weeks. But it was definitely a long selection process, which is something I was not aware of when I started. It had consisted of 2 applications that I had to fill out, a phone interview, and then they weeded us down and did an in-person interview here at the lab, and a lab tour. And then that also included a critical thinking exam. And then after that, we did a background check, and then another interview with HR. I had to take a polygraph exam, and then a psychology exam, and a physical exam, all before I was given my offer letter to move down here. So from a majority of it only took 5 months, but from the day when I started my first application to starting, it was almost 10 months. It was a long time to wait, and each step is very important and just takes time. But along with the time aspect, we're also in training for a long time, which makes sense because we want to do a good job and be 100% confident when we do work on actual casework. So I'm still in a training program right now. So for my job as a technician, the training is 6 months to 1 year, depending on what disciplines or what areas of forensics you're going into, or what, even within those disciplines, like for me in biology, it depends on what kind of bodily fluids they want me to look at. So my training will be close to a year. I'll be finished hopefully by the end of August. And then after that, I will have a period of supervised casework where I will be working on cases that actually come into the lab from agencies, but I will be supervised by a fully trained analyst to make sure that all my questions get answered and I'm processing things correctly. And then to become an analyst or a full-fledged forensic scientist, it will take another year or 2 to do all of the analysis, data analysis, statistics training that's required of us. So what we've been doing at our lab typically, for anyone that gets hired straight on as a forensic scientist, is that they complete their technician training and work in that capacity while they are doing their additional interpretation training. So just a little bit about my field of forensics and what my section does on the day-to-day. So when we talk about biology forensics, that's the examination and detection of bodily fluids typically. So anywhere you'd find DNA, all of these are important: blood, semen, saliva, feces, urine, and then touch DNA is like, say you use a hammer to break into a building. Well, we can swab the hammer and see who was touching it last, or maybe not last, but at least who has had their DNA on it recently. And so that's what you can see with the flashlight looking picture is that the scientist is looking for most likely semen stains on a pair of jeans. So that'd be a biology section. And then also the slide picture on the bottom is sperm cells. And that's our only confirmatory test to confirm the presence of semen. So those are both biology based. And then DNA section is all about typing out that biological material. So everybody has unique DNA, except for identical twins, but they're found in blood, semen, saliva, feces, urine. And the DNA process is all about how we extract or purify the DNA. So we get rid of all the dirt and junk, quote unquote, that surrounds the DNA. We break up the cells to get to the DNA. And then we quantify the DNA. So we determine how much human and then also how much male DNA, which is usually helpful for sexual assaults with a female victim and male suspect. It's typically when those are useful. And then once we quantify, so that means we figure out the concentration of DNA in a sample, we amplify for a specific amount that works best on our instruments, and we tag specific locations that we're looking for with certain dyes. And then lastly, we detect the DNA by separating it out based on size. And then that's where my process stops as a technician. And then the last final step, which goes on to an analyst, is to analyze the data and determine all sorts of things from the profile. So as a technician, like I said, I do all of the lab work up until interpretation, so what I just went over. But also we do a lot of housekeeping. So quality control testing of all of our supplies, all of our kits. We also order and maintain our inventory, making sure that we have everything we need to do our job successfully. Same thing with instrument maintenance, making sure everything's running smoothly for everyone that's in the lab, and preparing reagents for all of us to use. That's very much the bench science that you're probably used to from science class, and, you know, mixing one element with another, diluting it, all that fun stuff. Case management, which is the best way to put it is to vet a case, is to make sure that we have all of the material that we need here from the agencies, you know, check if it's gone to court, what its status, a lot of more paperwork and communication between ourselves, the DA's office, the agency that submitted the evidence, all of the above. And then lastly, court testimony is an important part of what we do for cases that go to trial. And then analysts, so a fully fledged forensic scientist, will do all of that, everything I just mentioned, plus they do the interpretation of DNA profiles. So once we get the data off the instrument, which you'll see what that looks like here, they do all sorts of analysis on it to determine the number of contributors, comparison to knowns. So we'll have something, an evidence sample, and then we'll compare it to the victim's known sample, so we can determine if the victim's on it, we can remove or assume their profile as a victim. It might be on something that was in their house or something similar to that. And then they run the statistics, which is a lot of math on those profiles. And then lastly, they're the ones who write the report and send it out to the agency or the DA's office involved, or those involved parties. So when I talk about a DNA profile, this is just a very clear, easy example. So they can get much more complicated than this, but you get half of your DNA from your biological dad and half of your DNA from your biological mom. And then we are looking at this profile, all profiles, we're looking at certain areas of DNA that have short tandem repeats. So they're short sections of DNA that repeat over and over and over again. And what our instrumentation does is count those number of repeats at those locations. So at the first example, the first allele has 17. And so that number means that there's 17 repeats at that location on that chromosome. And then the next one has 18. So that profile would be reported out as 17,18. Another interesting thing about this example is you can see in the very top left, it's labeled X and Y. So we know that this is a male profile because they have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome. But that's just the biology section of DNA in a very brief nutshell. There's so many other areas of forensics. So latent prints would be fingerprints. They do like footwear impressions, anything like that. Firearms and tool marks do all sorts of ballistic work. Drug chemistry and trace chemistry, toxology, those are all more chemistry-based sciences. Very important to what we do. And then video or multimedia is huge in the new coming age. It's all, I'm the least techie person, but any computers, any cell phones are huge in cracking cases nowadays. So they do all of that analysis. And then crime scene investigators do a lot of not just collecting the evidence, but also will do laboratory testing out in the field. Like for our presumptive test for blood and semen, they can do all of the same tests that we can out in the field. So there are specific requirements to getting into forensics. So this is specifically for biology DNA, where you would need a bachelor's of some sorts in biology, chemistry, or forensic science. And then you have to have classwork in biochemistry, genetics, molecular bio, statistics or population genetics, which is a genetics class that's more heavily based in statistics. And again, these just depend on your area of interest. So almost every section here, well, besides multimedia and video, requires some sort of hard science or physical science degree. And then a master's degree isn't required, but it is super helpful, and it's very common to see people work in crime labs with a master's, just because it is a competitive job market right now, and it does give you a leg up in the hiring process and just extra knowledge when you do start your own casework. So just a little bit about forensics as a field in general, and less about biology DNA side of it, is that the average salary is about 50 to 60,000 per year, but that definitely varies depending on years of experience. If you move up into leadership roles, one website I found talked about how moving up into lab management or lab director, you can make over 6 figures a year. And it also depends on your location. So some areas of the country pay more than others. So it's also something to pay attention to. Forensics in general has really good job security. Unfortunately, crime will always be a part of society, no matter what we do. And so we will continue to have jobs as crime continues. Really good benefits. We're usually a government employee. So I'm hired by the county, or you can be hired by the state. And so they usually get typically some sort of pension or something, which is nice when I think about retiring in, I don't know, 40 some years. But some of the cons, of course, every job has some. There are very few crime labs in compared to other career fields you might be interested in. Very few labs across the country, or like in each state, you know, there might be less than 10, or I know in Kansas there's only 3. So a lot of people travel for this type of work. Like I said, I moved here from Nebraska, so my closest family is 3 hours away, but that's pretty common for people I work with. I know people whose whole families are back in Wisconsin. You know, it's definitely hard to stick into your hometown area. Or what is typical is you'll do a few years far away. I know I had a coworker who worked in New Mexico, and she's originally from Missouri, and then has recently moved back here. After you build up that experience, you do have, or you may have opportunities to move back closer to home. Another con, of course, is the subject matter, which I'm sure you all are aware if you're here attending this talk, but this career field, you deal with homicides, sexual assaults, rapes, child abuse, domestic violence. You definitely see the worst of the worst. And it has to be something you think long and hard about. If you can handle that, dealing with that on the day-to-day, 40 hours a week. But it is very rewarding. Again, those are just more pros, is that it's so rewarding to feel like you're helping the community and making a difference through science. That was a big reason about why I wanted to get into this field, was I always had a love for science and wanted to help people with it, but the typical response to that is a medical field, which wasn't something I was super passionate about. And so I felt like this was a good way to help people and use science. And also just every day is different. So each case is different. My day-to-day schedule is different depending on what's going on and what's needed of me that day. So it definitely keeps me on my toes, and I'm hardly ever bored. So I really enjoy it. So my advice for you as people thinking about this field, job shadowing and internships are huge to get that hands-on experience and to just get your toe into the water, I guess, to see if this is really what you want to do. Kind of gets you away from the crime show, the misconceptions of crime shows, I guess. And research, if you are looking to get into a forensic science field, definitely get into a research lab at your university. Take classes you like, take classes you care about. I wasn't originally a biochem major. This wasn't really my original plan, but I ended up taking a course about popular trials just for fun as an elective. And it really sparked my interest again in criminal justice and this role that I have now. And I'm really glad that I took that class. Get to know your teaching staff, whether you go to a smaller university like I did or much larger university. Build connections with your professors and your teachers, lab assistants, all of that. They can all be helpful tools for you to find job shadows, to find letters of recommendation, to get your foot in the door, really go to office hours, all of those things to build those relationships. We're almost done. So we're going to switch to true crime, or forensic files is a good example. That's why that photo's up there. Much more realistic portrayal of forensics than Criminal Minds or Castle, any of those shows, because it definitely has some misconceptions with, like my biggest pet peeve is how long it takes on the shows. It'll be 2 minutes and they have the DNA results, where in real life it would take us, 6 to 8 weeks. And or I think it's NCIS where like the lab personnel will be making the arrest. Like I have no authority to do that. It's very much a team effort between us and the DA's office. It's not just us running the whole show, but that doesn't make for good TV. Be safe and smart in college and in your life. What I mean by that is just if you're looking to be employed by a sheriff's office or the government or police department, they do take criminal records seriously. They do stalk you on Twitter, Facebook. I'm sure eventually they'll get to TikTok. So just keep those things appropriate, something you'd want your future employer to see. And then lastly, always look for accredited university and programs. Make sure that they are an accredited science program or an accredited forensic science program. But I think that's all I have for you guys today for prepared slides, but you can always reach out to me. My contact info is in the top left. I'd love to answer any questions you have after this. I know we're going to stick around and do a Q&A, but if you come up with anything later, please feel free to email or call me at this contact info.
I thank you, Lindsay. That was wonderful information. I'm sure it's very helpful to everyone listening. We have several questions already in
Okay.
the Q&A box. So just as a reminder to everyone, if you have questions, you'll see the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Click on that, type in your questions, and I will read them to Lindsay. We'll start with something you touched on. It's from screen name Yash, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who wants to know what are the courses and degrees we need to take to meet the requirements, which I assume means to become a forensic science scientist. And you talked about that in your presentation, especially the college coursework. What should high schoolers be taking? What would you recommend if someone's starting high school, maybe midway through high school, that would help them in college?
Yeah, so I think if you're a high schooler and you're seriously considering this career field, definitely AP courses if that's offered. I wish I would have taken more advantage of that in high school. Get to those upper level chemistry or biology classes, because that'll definitely give you a leg up when you do go to university. Even if you take general biology in college, it's nice to have that background information from high school to give you a leg up and a more full understanding. I'd also recommend psychology courses to get an interesting perspective if you're looking to do anything more detective related or more CSI. But definitely with any degrees, we always say, obviously a forensic science degree is great, but any physical science, personally, I think really helps you in a career field. Forensic science is very narrow, and so we look for forensic science or a physical science degree of any sort, and so I think that really opens up horizons for you in the future if you look more toward a chemistry, biology, biochemistry, something like that.
Don't shy away from the hard classes.
Yeah, no, there's always, that's a good point. There's always people to help you. If you really have a passion for forensic science or science in general, but those tough classes scare you, there's always going to be tutors or professors or online resources. We live in the digital age, which is so good because there's so many instructional videos out there to watch, and it really is worth it in the end.
Next question is, and you've answered this already, how many years of college education do you have to go through to become a forensic scientist? And a bachelor's degree sounds like the minimum.
The minimum. It is the minimum. That's actually set by a governing board for us. You have to have your bachelor's, which is 4 years typically. Some people get it done more or less. Or long. Yeah, exactly. And then a master's degree program is usually about 2 or 3 years. And that's not required, but it is a good leg up in the interview process.
Yes, there are some 2-year forensic science programs out there at community colleges. So those would be feeder degrees to go on to complete a bachelor's then, yeah. Yes,
and yes, you would still have to complete a bachelor's, but definitely it would give you some great background knowledge, and any classes you can take would be helpful, but yeah.
Next question. Here's an interesting question. What's the hardest part of your job?
Oh, definitely for me, it's been the subject matter. Like I said, I tend to be a very bubbly, happy-go-lucky kind of person. So when you spend 40 hours a week hearing about the worst type of things that can happen to someone, that definitely can take a toll, but we do have systems in place to handle that. We have something called peer support, which is pretty common in both of the places where I shadowed. In the Omaha Police Department, they also had peer support, which is a trained coworker who will sit down and talk to you anonymously about any cases or any situations outside of the lab, outside of the division, to be there to support each other. Definitely having a inner circle of friends and family that I can go to if I'm having a rough day, that are there to listen. And just, the big thing is self-care, just when the day's done, doing something to relax and to take your mind off of it, by doing something you enjoy, is really important, but it is doable.
Let me ask a follow-up with that.
Okay. Yeah.
Was that going in before you got your job?
Mm-hmm.
Did you think that would be the hardest part of the job, or did you have something else in mind? To put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I guess I'm trying to remember what I thought, a year ago, what I thought the hardest part.
Or did the job shadowing and internship open your eyes to that?
It did, especially, I was going to touch on this a little bit, but the internship wasn't with a crime lab. It was with the detectives of the Child Victim Sexual Assault Unit, which for me personally are the hardest cases.
Yeah.
So that definitely opened my eyes. Yes, I did think that this was going to be the hardest part, but I just want to reiterate that it is doable, and we have each other to lean on in the lab too. If we're having a rough day, you can always go talk to a coworker. It is kind of nice because we all understand each other. We all have cases that get to us more deeply than others.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get your job shadow and internship? Did professors help you? Teachers help you? Was there a place at school that helps students get those?
Yes. So personally, for me, the very first job shadowing experience I had at the Ankeny Crime Lab came from a professor who I did research with. So again, I just built a relationship with her. I was in her anatomy class and had gone to her office hours and had chatted with her about my career goals. And they're great networking opportunities, professors are. She knew one of the scientists at the crime lab in Ankeny and gave me his contact info and offered to introduce us, which is how I got that role, or that job shadowing opportunity. And then the one in Omaha, which is where I'm from, was actually a family friend, of a forensic scientist there. So it's definitely word of mouth and networking, since it is such a small community of forensic scientists. And then the internship, I just, Google's your friend. Google forensic internships, if you're willing to travel. I was lucky enough to find one in Omaha, which is where I'm from. So I could stay at home with my parents during that time. But there's several labs all across the country that have summer internships for typically college students, but job shadowing can be done by high schoolers as well.
And you offer that at your lab? We
do. Coronavirus is throwing a wrench into everything, but we do offer, typically, students will come and shadow for the day, get a tour. We also have summer internships in almost every, it depends on the year, but typically every section will take an intern for the summer. So hopefully by next summer, that'll be back up and running.
Be back to normal, whatever that will be.
Right, the new normal.
All right, we have a question. What is the age limit, or is there an age limit? I assume a minimum age to become a forensic scientist.
Not that I know of. I don't want to tell you incorrectly. I guess the typical age would be when you finish college, you're typically 22 or 23. But I know some people who probably finish sooner. I'd like to guess that you probably have to be 21. at least 18. I know you at least have to be a adult, unless you're 19 in Nebraska, but I'm not sure. I'm going to guess 21, and we're just going to go with that. But I'll look it up and get back to Eric. I'll send that information to you if I find it.
All right.
Yeah.
You talked about writing reports, testifying in court. So the so-called soft skills, communication, writing, sound like very important to your job.
Yes.
How did you, do you have any recommendations on how to develop these skills?
Yeah. My biggest, I guess, assistance in that section, since my classes are very science focused, the soft skills like public speaking, it doesn't have to be your favorite thing to go into forensics. We, sometimes it's not your favorite thing, sometimes it's your favorite, but definitely take opportunities outside of the sciences to practice public speaking. So I took a speech class in college as an elective. I know several community colleges also offer that for transfer credit. That would be a great class to take outside of the sciences for cheaper, way cheaper at community college. And they teach you skills to be less nervous and to speak in front of crowds. And then with the report writing and such, a lot of that is covered in your science classes. But a lot of universities will require some sort of English writing classes, but just being able to communicate in words and in written words what you're trying to convey concisely is really important when we're trying to keep our reports as short as possible. It's pretty important.
You were a double major in college in difficult subject matters. I assume you were a very good student in high school as well. But do you have any hints, helpful tips to develop good study skills? What's worked for you? What hasn't worked?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. No one's asked me about my study habits like all year. So what's really worked for me is, or what did work for me when I was in college, is that transition from high school to college is very difficult. You're much more in charge of your time. In high school, at least in my high school, we had a lot of free time during the day to do homework. And so it was very rare that I had homework after school. I worked a part-time job, came home, and then went to bed. I didn't really think about homework that much outside of the school day, whereas in college, they spend the whole hour and a half lecturing with you or instructing you in some way. And the homework is homework, and it's definitely, you have to learn to manage your free time. And something that really helped me was learning that every free time is an opportunity to study. My freshman year, if I had a half hour in between classes, I don't want to say goof off, but I'd be on my phone or talking to friends and trying to be smarter about if I study more during the day, I can have more free time later during the week when it's more important to me. And just finding ways to study in places that you don't typically study, because sometimes the libraries full or the study rooms in your science hall are full. And so trying to break out of the stereotypical quiet study room. There's also, like I said, we live in the digital age. So a friend of mine, I called her the Quizlet Queen because Quizlet, I don't know if I can name drop a website, but flashcards.
No, go ahead.
Okay, they're super helpful. And you can get an app on your phone and just run through flashcards in between classes just to reinforce the lecture that you just had. And definitely get a good study group together, a good support system. To share notes with.
I was going to ask about that. It's
yeah.
Choose your friends wisely, and
yes.
People have motivation and.
I think there's a speaker I had in high school once who said, you know, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. And that really stuck with me because that's anything from classes. You know, if you have friends who are also dedicated to your class, they're going to help motivate you to be a better student and work harder, and you can build each other up. But also just, like I said, about being smart and safe in high school and college, you know, stick with the right friend group that's going to respect your career aspirations and not pressure you in any way to do anything illegal. So.
What was that app again? Quizlet?
Quizlet.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
You talked about the transition from high school to college. Mm-hmm. What were the biggest challenges going from college to your career?
Wow. That's a great question. It's definitely the biggest challenges. I definitely have a lot more free time as a real adult now. In college, you spend, especially if you're dedicated to your studies, you know, a lot of time studying, a lot of time in the library, a lot of time hanging out with friends. That's a different thing, is that in college, your friends live, you know, in the dorm hall with you, or they live down the street in a different sorority house or something. Whereas as a real adult, you know, something nice about forensics is that it is a 9-to-5 type job when you do the lab work. And so my evenings are free to do whatever I want typically. There's no homework, which is a blessing. And then, but yeah, but other than that, I guess some of the other challenges is like, I did move here for this job, and your friends after college kind of spread out. And everybody moves somewhere for a job typically, or go back home. So I think those have been the hardest, and just learning how to budget with a full-time paycheck, but also full-time responsibilities as well. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And you can't take your work home, right? I mean,
no. Oh, no.
The chain of custody with evidence is
Yes.
Very strict, I know. And
yes, it all stays locked up back here. We are not allowed to take anything out with us, which is nice. I like that work-life balance that we have.
That is nice. I hadn't thought about that before, but yeah, you have to leave your work at work.
Oh, I know. We had a joke when we went remote for a little bit with coronavirus, the pandemic, and we always joked like, oh, we should just build labs in our garages, which is a joke, but because we can't do our work, our lab work at least, from home at all. So.
You went to Drake University, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice about selecting the right college program?
Biggest thing is that it's accredited, and whatever you want to learn about. If you want to major in forensic science, make sure it's an accredited program. If you want to learn about biochemistry like I did, make sure it's an accredited program.
Now, Lindsey, when you say accredited,
yes,
you just don't mean the college is accredited, but are there specific accrediting agencies for forensic science?
Yes, there is. I'd have to look it up to give you the correct name, but there is a specific governing board to evaluate forensic science programs. Because several schools can offer forensic programs, but not all of them are accredited by this board, which is important. Also, I think there's a lot of factors that go into selecting a college just besides that. For me, it was about distance from home, class size, campus size. Des Moines is very much a up and coming city, which was exciting to me as an 18-year-old. So there's so many factors that go into it, but I just want to reiterate that whether you're at a small private school or a large public university, just really make an effort to make connections with your professors and study hard, because that's what's really going to push you forward.
We have a question about funding for forensic units. And I think, as you mentioned, they are government funded, yes. Whether the city, county, state. Are there Are there jobs doing forensic work for private companies?
Yes, there are. That's a great question. There are a few private opportunities out there. They're typically more geared, at least from what I know in the biology DNA section, they're a lot more geared towards paternity testing, which is testing that we can do at the lab. But there are private labs that offer that service. And then also, typically the way it works is that a defense counsel or defense attorney can also hire a private outside lab to work on the evidence as well. When they do the exact same things that we do, just to verify that everything's done correctly. So those kinds of labs are not as common, but they are out there. And they are a good stepping stone if you want to work for a local government.
I have a question about math or science.
Yeah.
Question is it more important to be better at math or science?
Oh.
Or all of the above, maybe?
I know that feels like the right answer, but it feels like a cop out. Both are very important. Definitely, they go very hand in hand. My gut reaction is to say science. And the only reason I say that is because a lot of our analysis and a lot of our spreadsheets and dilutions can all be done online somehow or with a computer, whereas understanding the science behind all of it is much more what we handle on the day-to-day and explain in court. But you do have to have a good balance of both, because I know that the analysts have to explain the statistics in court to other people. So but again, don't get discouraged if math isn't your thing. There's, at least at my college, and I'm sure others, there's tutoring centers and online learning opportunities. Don't let a class or a certain class scare you away from the career field you're interested in.
And I think that's an important thing. Same with internship, getting internships, that there is a support system with college programs. There are people whose job it is to help you succeed.
Yes. Career centers, they're usually called something different at every university, but there are staff that'll help you while you're in college, during the job search, even after you find a job, you know, how to negotiate, how to land an interview, how to write a thank you note after an interview, all the good stuff that you don't think about. And they're there to help you, because your universities want you to be employed. So definitely stop by their offices or send an email.
I had a professor in college describe his role as he saw it, sports coach, where he, he said, I want you to succeed like a coach wants the team to succeed. I'm not going to hide anything from you or trick you. It's like, I want you to be successful.
Yeah, of course.
I've always remembered that.
Yeah, that's definitely how professors, especially those good professors, that's how they do their role. So I like that, yeah.
And Mary has posted in chat, in the Q&A chat, the governing board for accreditation is the Forensic Science Education Programs Accreditation Commission.
Say that 5 times fast. Yes.
Forensic Science Education Programs Accreditation Commission. And I assume if you Google that, they will have a list of accredited college programs. Or back to your point, Lindsay, look for that when you explore college programs. And we have a couple technical questions here.
Okay, I'll try my best.
Someone wants to know what typically spoils a biological sample. For example, what would spoil a blood sample?
A big thing that we deal with, it's going to sound kind of gross, mold is a big problem that we have if it's not packaged correctly at the scene by investigators. or by CSI, whoever is handling the evidence right away. Mold is a big factor in blood. We could have not to be too graphic, but we could have a bloody t-shirt that could be the key to cracking the case, but if it doesn't get packaged properly, once we get it to the lab and open it up for testing, mold degrades the DNA. The bacteria is also bad for it too, so that can ruin all of our chances of getting a good result. Great question.
And this is my question. What's the educational background usually for the crime scene investigator? The people who actually are on the scene?
Yes. So I reached out to one of my coworkers down in crime scene just to be sure, because I didn't want to give any wrong information. But they do also require or prefer a forensic science or physical science degree, because they do all of the same blood, semen, saliva testing that we do in the lab. They also recommended for courses, they're not required, like the genetics and the biochem is for my field, but they do suggest a photography course. Specifically, if there's a photography course geared towards forensics, or they also said if you could shadow an ME's office and maybe view an autopsy, because that is part of their job, is to witness autopsies. And that can be hard to handle for some people. But to answer your question, plainly, a degree would still be the
same
degree.
Requirements.
Yes.
We have a question, which, yeah, it's a great question, I think. How long was the hardest case you have worked or seen taken? How long have you?
Like how much?
How much time was the longest case you've ever worked on?
That's a great question. So I've only been here 11 months almost. So I can't get into any specifics because most of the cases I've seen haven't gone to court. Once they're public record, I can share details, but to answer the time question, some of the harder, more difficult cases are usually what we consider to rush cases are, homicides where like they need our evidence worked to charge the suspect, or stranger rapes that you need to catch the person who did it. So those are very quick turnaround, but usually 2 days on our end, where that's all hands on deck, overtime's approved, all of that type of stuff. So yeah, that would be the quickest, and those are usually the harder cases. But it also depends on how much evidence there is, because if it's just a normal case, that's still difficult or tricky to handle. I know some analysts who will spend all week or 2 weeks, 40 hours a week, just looking at one case, making sure they check over every piece of evidence, because we are very detail oriented and don't want to forget anything.
Yeah.
So it very much depends.
Right, we're about to the top of the hour. So let me give you one more question,
Okay.
to wrap things up.
Yeah.
What advice do you have now that would make it easier for others just getting started? And another way to say that, what do you know now that you wish you knew back in high school or college?
Oh, in regards to my career, I would say take every opportunity you can. Like I said, my internship wasn't with a crime lab, and I was very disappointed at the time. I was very, dramatic, like this is the end of it, this is the end of the world. But it actually was really eye-opening for me, and still a great talking point for internships, or for interviews after the internship. And so yeah, just look for every opportunity. It doesn't have to specifically be crime scene related or forensics related, but any sort of hands-on opportunity you can get is great. And then just on a personal note, for any high schoolers out there, don't compare yourself to others so much, because you get out in the real world and it doesn't matter as much as you thought it did. So just be yourself and do what makes you happy.
That's great advice.
Well, thanks.
And it applies to every field, no matter what.
Yes,
what
exactly.
you go into. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
true. So thank you, Lindsey, so much for taking the time today to join us.
Well, thanks for having me.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Don't forget, the fourth Friday of each month, we'll have these How Do I Become programs. We've got them scheduled through most of fall. So be back here, fourth Friday, 2 p.m. Central. Thank you again, Lindsey, and thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.
Thank you.
See ya.